trying to work our way through the halachot of Rosh Hashanah, just to work out what we're supposed to be doing, what we're not supposed to be doing. We managed to get to all of Erev. We got through Erev Rosh Hashanah. For those of you that have just arrived, so your Erev Rosh Hashanah is going to be, a big gaping hole of ignorance, but that's okay, right? That serves you right for coming late. It's all about missing out on the air conditioning, right? My brother's a teacher. He had it years ago. He wrote in somebody's report card. He said there are gaps in his ignorance, and he said that he said he got into so much trouble for writing it, but he said it was true. He said this kid was a complete moron, but every now and then he said something which made sense. It was like wow, say that again. Anyway, so Erev Rosh Hashanah, I'm afraid whatever you know about Erev Rosh Hashanah from last year is what you're going to know for this year. And if you want to know more about Erev Rosh Hashanah, I guess come back next year, but come back, a couple of days earlier than you came this year, I guess. Okay, we started talking about little bits and pieces that are added into the davening, into the prayers, things that are going to focus on God being the King, HaMelech HaKadosh, those kinds of things. Interestingly enough, on Rosh Hashanah, everybody uses a machzor to daven with, right, which is a prayer book, which means that it's okay to daven a little bit louder than usual. Normally when we come to pray the Amidah, so it's normally done quietly, hopefully, right? There's always one person who's sort of praying a little bit too loud and it's bothering everybody else, but normally I've worked out that the person who's praying a little bit too loud is praying like that because he is hard of hearing, and by the time you get across the fact that he's bothering everybody else, it takes a little while because he can't hear you. So when you come to daven Rosh Hashanah, you can daven a little bit louder than usual because everybody's using a machzor. Everybody's praying out of a prayer book. Nobody knows the stuff off by heart. It's very long. The prayers are very different. The prayers, we only say them once a year. Another thing that you'll see going on Rosh Hashanah at night time, after the prayers are finished, everybody is going to go around and they're going to wish everybody a good year. However, it's a phrase which is said in Hebrew, which is L'shana tova, you should have a good year. Techatev v'techatem, you should be written and you should be signed. La'alta l'chaim tovim, immediately for a good life. Right, that's the custom. Everyone goes around. That's what they say to each other. Again, L'shana tova, techatev v'techatem, you should be written and you should be signed. La'alta l'chaim tovim, immediately for a good life, in Mitzvah Hashem. We should all be signed and sealed into the book of life immediately on Rosh Hashanah in Mitzvah Hashem. And that's a minute what everybody does. So you'll see everybody's going around shaking everybody's hands and, murmuring this little phrase over here. And, you can either take your machzor with you. It'll be written in the machzor at the end of Ma'ariv. It'll be written over there, the phrase that you use. You can either take your machzor with you and just, read it out to people as you wish them Shana Tova, or you can just mumble under your breath like everyone else is doing in the hope that no one's going to realize that you haven't got a clue what you're saying. Either one is successful, I think. On the second night of Rosh Hashanah, the custom is not to use that phrase. It's only being recited on the first night of Rosh Hashanah because hopefully during the first day of Rosh Hashanah, you'll have reached that point where God has signed and sealed you into the book of life because of your incredible righteousness and piety. No, I was being serious. That wasn't a joke. You smiled for some reason. So on the second night of Rosh Hashanah, the custom is just to wish everybody a good Yom Tov, a Shana Tova, without all of the extra bits and pieces that are added in. Now, moving on, when you get to wherever you're going to be eating on Rosh Hashanah night, you'll see that there'll be a whole bunch of what are called simanim. What are simanim? They're all different kinds of foods that are eaten that have some kind of a connection to the idea of having a good year. And there are little phrases that are recited which normally play on the word of what it is that you're eating in order to have some kind of a prayer that's going to go with it. So, for example, you eat carrots and that God should decree. The word decree is ligzor. Carrot is a gezer. It's the same root. It's the same word. So, he should decree upon us good decrees. Gzerot tovot. Right? So we'll see all kinds of things out. I don't know. Some places that you'll go to, they'll probably just have an apple and a honey. That's the famous symbol of Rosh Hashanah. And we dip the apple in the honey and we say that we should have a sweet new year. And that's probably something, that's something which I imagine everybody here is pretty much familiar with. However, depending on where you go, depends on how many different kinds of simonim you'll have. Carrots, leeks, beetroots, pumpkin, fish, pomegranates, head of a fish. All of these things have got little prayers that are attached to them, and people recite them, right? So again, just whatever people are doing around you, that's what you should do. The Yerushalmi custom is to have lots and lots of these different things, right? And you'll see people eating all different kinds of things and reciting these little Yehirotzens, yeah.
All the prayers for each thing is in the machzor?
You'll find, actually, no, not normally. What we have at home is we have a whole bunch of little cards that have all the prayers written up on side of them.
For gezer, for pumpkin.
Yeah, for all of these things. With the Yehirotzen that's recited when you come to eat it. Just certain things you need to be aware of is that if you're making if you're going to have an apple and honey, so you need to make a bracha over the apple, even though you've already made a bracha over the challah. But fruits, as a rule, don't get included inside of the Hamoitzi Lechem Min Haaretz, so you need to make another bracha over there. Let's talk about honey. Yeah.
Why pomegranate?
Why pomegranate? Because pomegranates are supposed to be full of seeds. According to the Gemara, again,
that symbolizes 613.
It symbolizes the idea that the same way that the pomegranate is stuffed full of seeds, so you are stuffed full of mitzvahs. Right? What's interesting is now that it's an important point that you just brought up, which I would have forgotten. Not at all. I was just saving it for later. Right? But homes that you go to on the first night of Rosh Hashanah, it could be that they won't eat a pomegranate, and they'll only eat it on the second night of Rosh Hashanah. Why is that? Because you need to recite something that you're going to say Shechianu over. What is Shechianu? It's a bracha that you recite when you're eating something new that you haven't eaten, right, for the whole year, right? So again, most people, even if you eat pomegranates, right, most people wait until Rosh Hashanah until they eat the first pomegranates of the season. If you know anything about pomegranates, you'll know that they're just beginning to ripen now anyway. So here in Israel, I don't know what goes on in other places in the world, but here, so you have to get pomegranates that don't have Shemitah issues. But the idea is to recite the Shechianu over something, so you may find that people have got on their table different kinds of interesting looking fruits, right? And they're there in order to be able to say the Shechianu.
Only on perot? Only on perot?
Only on perot, not only on fruit, not on vegetables, yeah.
Did you say that you say two bracha, one for just whatever food it is, like we would any other time of the year, and then another for the simon that goes along with.
Yeah, so the thing that you're saying for the simon is not really, it's not a bracha, it's more of a, I'm just gonna sound confusing. It's not a bracha in the formal sense of the word. You don't say Baruch Atah Hashem, right? They say the way that you would when you recite a blessing, but it is a blessing. You say Yehiratzon Ufanecha Hashem Elokeinu, there should be your will, right? That we should have whatever this thing is representing, whatever simon that you're. It's not a typical bracha, but it's definitely something which has got a blessing inside of it.
And each one has their own?
Each one has their own thing, right? So,
or like each fruit, individual fruit has their own? Fruits have their one?
No, I think the thing, again, I'm just trying to remember from last year, but for example, fruits is not a great example because as far as I can remember, the only fruit we eat with the simonim is a pomegranate. But with regards to vegetables, right, so each vegetable represents something else.
Okay.
Right, so you'll say a blessing over, again, not a blessing, but a Yehiratzon, which has got a blessing inside of it, over the carrot that you should have this, and that over the pumpkin that it should be this, and over the that's the way that it was. And each one's got its own little phrase. They all start off the same way. Yehiratzon ufanecha Hashem Elokeinu v'Elokei Avotenu, and then you'll have whatever the phrase is that goes together with whatever you're eating, and it's going to be a play on the words of the food that you're eating.
What's the simon on the carrot? Again, I'm sorry.
Sheyeh gzerot tovot. Right, from the word gezer. right? Decrees. We should have good decrees. Here, for example, when you eat something from the head of the fish, that we should be la Rosh v'lo la zanav. We should be like the head and not like the tail. Some people have, again, you may go to somebody's house where they have the head of a lamb. Now, they're not going to have the head of a lamb sitting on the table, right? But they may have little patties that are made out of, some of the meat from the head of the lamb. Just as a little thing over here. You don't have to eat this stuff. You really don't. Which means if you're a little squeamish about it, it's okay just to say the Hiratzon and to, pass. You don't have to eat it.
My parents love that lamb stuff.
Oh, yeah?
It'd be cheap to use like a head of lettuce.
You know what, maybe?
A lot of people try to eat the head of fish.
Listen, I don't know how to break this to you, but I am the prince of squeamishness. And if I can't identify something, I'm not going to eat it. And very often, if I can't identify it, I'm not going to eat it either, right? And so I don't eat the fish of the head. Normally, somebody at the table who will eat it and kind of fulfill everybody's obligation for eating this thing. But even if you don't have to eat it. It's just it's a symbol. It's a very beautiful idea, right? We should be like the head and not like the tail. Yeah.
I don't know if you spoke about this last week, but why do we have 2 nights of Rosh Hashanah?
Oh, I didn't speak about it. We'll get to it in Mitzvah Hashem. Just before we get over there.
Yeah, we spoke about it in Mishnah Yot.
Oh, good, right? Mishnah in Rosh Hashanah talks about why there are two days of Rosh Hashanah. However, in the meantime, something that I wanted to say, which has now slipped my mind, which was the Shechianu. Where does the idea of reciting the bracha of Shechianu come from? So whenever we have a Yom Tov, actually this is going to suit you very well, one with the other. Let's have a look and see. Whenever you have a Yom Tov, we recite Shechianu over the Yom Tov. So when the ladies light the candles, they recite Shechianu. They write the bracha for, Ladlik Ner Shel Yom Tov. And then they recite the bracha, Shechianu v'kimanu v'gianu lazman hazeh, which is a special blessing that we recite when we reach this point in our lives where we're able now to make this bracha. We didn't have Rosh Hashanah for a whole year, so now we're going to recite the bracha over it. The problem, when the father comes home from shul and he makes Kiddush, so inside of Kiddush he'll recite Shechianu. The problem is, what do we do with the second night of Rosh Hashanah? Because the second night of Rosh Hashanah, it's new and it's not new, right? And what are we supposed? We just had a Rosh Hashanah the day before, so what are we making Shechianu over? So according to the halacha, it is correct on the second night of Rosh Hashanah to either have a fruit in front of you, something which you would recite a Shechianu over normally, or a piece of clothing, right? So maybe a new suit. It's got to be a piece of clothing that you would normally recite a Shechianu over. So wearing a new pair of socks may not do it. Although if you're a Shiva Bacha, who knows? Maybe if you're not going to recite Shechianu, your roommate certainly may recite it. If you finally put on a new pair of socks, that's definitely a possibility. But so the Shechianu, when you come to recite the Shechianu at Kiddush time, is being recited not just on the second day of Rosh Hashanah, but it's also going to fulfill your obligation to be through the piece of fruit that you're going to eat as well. Right, we're just covering our bases in case there is a problem with reciting Shechianu over the second day of Rosh Hashanah, in case it's not really its own Yom Tov with its own identity. So therefore, we have the piece of fruit in front of us as well, and we recite Shechianu over that, and we're fulfilling our obligation that way as well. Okay, that's why it's important to have a piece of fruit or clothing that you've got in order to be able to make the Shechianu. Try to find a piece of fruit that you like. Right? Some people are not very keen on pomegranates. So, it would be better to find a piece of fruit. It doesn't have to be a pomegranate, even though pomegranate is one of the symbols of the new year. But nevertheless, it doesn't have to be a pomegranate. If you've got a piece of fruit, you've got a fruit that you prefer, which is something that you would be happy to make a Shechianu over, that's definitely the correct thing to do. Okay, let's talk a little bit about honey. Honey? Let's talk about honey. Again, one of the symbols of Rosh Hashanah, of course, is honey. Anybody who's ever experienced Rosh Hashanah knows that apple and honey, challah and honey, that's like a standard symbol of Rosh Hashanah. What you may not be familiar with is that the custom to use honey runs all the way through from Rosh Hashanah until the end of Sukkot. Right? So, normally what do? We eat challah and we dip our challah in the salt, right? So anyone who experienced Shabbos on Friday night, Shabbos morning, that's what happened. The challah was dipped into the salt and then passed around. On Rosh Hashanah, what is going to happen is there'll be no salt and the challah will be dipped into honey and it will be sent around. And of course, it's an unparalleled opportunity to get sticky and to make other people sticky as well. There is a custom, I personally know, there is a custom which is that of somebody known as the Khatam Sofer, who writes that you should have salt and honey, right? That we shouldn't give up using salt simply because we're using honey as well. And you should dip your challah into salt, and then you should dip it into honey as well. It's not very rare, it's pretty rare. You may go around to somebody's house and you may see them using salt and honey. If that's the case, just smile and bravely eat whatever they've given you. I'm not convinced that salt and honey go together so great, but you'll get over it. It'll be okay, I'm telling you.
There's a lot of money being made on sweet and salty together.
You'll probably eat worse things in your life. Yeah. So, like I said, over here, what's the big deal? Most places that you're going to go to, you're going to just have apple and honey and bread and honey, and it's going to be fine, right? You may end up at somebody's house where they dip their challah into salt and then they dip it into honey. Just so you should know that that's a perfectly acceptable custom as well, even though it's certainly not as found as the regular custom. Where does this custom to dip things into honey come from? So it's a very beautiful idea, it really is. You're supposed to recite Yiratzamu Fanecho, that it should be Emet Hashem, a Shana Tova Umutuka. It should be a good, sweet year. Right? And the idea is that if you say it often enough, maybe that's what's going to be. Right? So we dip our bread into honey from Rosh Hashanah all the way through until the end of Sukkot, not just when we're eating on Shabbat, not just when we're eating on Yom Tov, but every time that you eat bread, you're supposed to dip it into a little bit of honey when you are in this time of the year. If you don't have honey, so fine. Nothing you can do about it, right? So you go to your...
Is this like an halacha, or what is this, like a minhag? Or where does this come from?
I think it's hovering in between the two, actually. It's definitely a custom. It's a very early custom. And something which is not so simple for somebody to say, I'm not doing this. Again, if somebody, for example, if somebody is diabetic and it's bad for them to use honey, then for sure you shouldn't use honey. I hope that's understood, right? Don't sort of start force-feeding your guest, right, with honey because, and watch him go into some kind of a seizure because that's not great. Really, it's not. There is another custom, and this one really is just a custom, not to eat nuts from Rosh Hashanah until after Yom Kippur. Some people even have the custom not to eat nuts until they get to Simchat Torah, until the after Sukkot, right?
Because they don't have a crazy year, because it's going to be nuts.
Nah, they're going to be nuts anyway. No, it's interesting. The source of the idea of not eating nuts is because the word egoz, which is nut, in Hebrew is 17, and the word chet, which means sin, when spelt with an aleph, is 18. But if you know anything about the Hebrew language, if you knock the aleph off at the end, it still sounds like chet. Chet, tet, sounds like chet, even without the aleph. So it's all very contrived. You don't eat nuts on Rosh Hashanah because it's got almost the same gematria as the word for sin. Right? That way, we'll try to remember that we're not supposed to sin. The Kotzker Rebbe, one of the great Hasidic Rebbes from about 180 years ago, lived in Eastern Europe, was famous for his very, very sharp comments, very pithy comments. He says that the word chet, he says there's another word with the gematria, with the numerical value of chet, and that's chet. He says very often on Rosh Hashanah, people get very, very concerned about nuts, not eating with nuts. Yes, eating with nuts, we've got to be careful. They're so busy being careful about not eating with nuts that they tend to ignore what Rosh Hashanah is really all about, which is the idea of trying not to sin and trying to do tshuva.
But can you realistically still eat with nuts? Like, I'm pretty sure my family still they never stopped.
Can you realistically eat nuts? I think you realistically can.
I mean, is it going to cause an issue?
Well, I don't know. That's somewhat dependent upon you, isn't it? Yeah, it's an interesting question. Are you should you eat nuts? The answer is it's better to avoid them. Is something going to happen to you if you eat nuts? No. The whole idea over here is that it's supposed to be reminding you that you're supposed to be in a state of tshuva, of trying to repent and atone. And, if a person concentrates on that and doesn't concentrate on eating nuts, they're in better shape than someone who concentrates on not eating nuts and doesn't concentrate on the idea of doing tshuva, right? I think that's understood.
It seems to me like the kind of thing that if you're going to follow it between Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur, you would follow that the rest of the year also. Because the chet is never good.
Yeah, but nuts are. Let's not be radical about this, huh? There's always one fanatic in the room.
That's my argument to continue having nuts. Let's not be fanatical.
Pesach, you have the forces.
On Pesach, yeah. There's nothing wrong with eating nuts. There really isn't. Rabbi said, listen to me carefully. There's nothing wrong with eating nuts. Some people have the custom not to eat nuts on Rosh Hashanah. That's all. That's all it is.
Had I known this would be an anti-nut class, I wouldn't have shut up.
Oh gosh, here, look what we sparked off of it. There'll be demonstrations outside. The pro nut lobby is going to be going nuts, I guess. Whatever. Anyway, yeah.
I actually have a friend who.
No, don't be silly.
He said he went past it by giving chocolate covered nuts, so it changed the gematria altogether.
There's always somebody, that's called a Gemara cup. There's always somebody over there who's able to work it out. They wave their thumbs around a little bit. We'll get around the problem. Yeah.
I have two things. So basically you're saying...
This is incredible. I mean, we went to a whole bunch of things. Nobody does anything. We're talking about not eating nuts. Everybody, this is it. Everyone's got something to say now. It's just a nut. That's all it is.
Clear. So we don't eat a gauze just to remind us not to sin because it's time for
Yeah.
Shiva.
Yeah.
Right? Okay. Second thing. So you mean to tell me from Rosh Hashanah till Sukkot and Yom Kippur, also when it's at Tzom, we eat challah dipped in honey.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. All the way through Sukkot
Every
as
day,
well. From Rosh Hashanah onwards, all the way through. 10 days of repentance, the meal before Yom Kippur, the meal after Yom Kippur.
Every meal of the day we dip.
Every meal that you're going to eat bread, should dip it into honey. Yeah. Now again, what's going to happen when you go to your
with turkey?
With turkey is still okay, right?
Well.
Honey-based turkey is pretty good stuff, right? You gotta go to your regular falafel joint, right?
You're over there in
That
Tel
also
Aviv.
sounds delicious.
Oh gosh,
You're in
okay.
Los Angeles, instead of ketchup, you're like honey on your hot dog. People are staring at you.
Well, look, they're going to stare at you anyway, so at least give them a reason, right? I'm saying you go to your local falafel joint. I don't think he's going to have honey out there instead of tahina. I really don't, right? So, whatever. So, in that kind of a situation, so you won't use honey, but if you've got the opportunity to be able to do it, then it's for sure it's a right thing to do. It should, again, just this idea of sweetness, that it should be a good sweet year in Mitzvah Hashem. Mm-hmm. I once heard an interesting story from Rav Auerbach in Ramat Chen. He told me like this. He said that once, many years ago, a lady came to him, and she came after Rosh Hashanah, between Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur, and she was pretty distraught. And she said to him she'd baked a cake for Rosh Hashanah, and she'd put nuts into it. And they ate the cake, and now she doesn't know what is it okay? It's not okay. Half the cake is still left. Can they eat it? They can't eat it, right? So he said to me, what would you tell the lady? If it was you, what would you tell the lady? So I said, well, after I'd finished giggling, I would say to her, for goodness sakes, don't be ridiculous. Just don't sin. That's the idea over here, right? So he says, you know what I did? He says, I said to her 1 minute, and I took out a book, and I started reading through it, and then I said to tell me, I said, how many nuts were there in the mixture compared to everything else? So she said, whatever it was, right? And I told her, I thought for a bit, and I said, okay. I said, it's what you did is okay, but in future you should be more careful.
I wonder what's left over.
I didn't ask him that. I said to him, why do you do that? It's a ridiculous question, right? So he said, because if I would have reacted the way that you reacted, she would never come back and ask a question again, right? But if I take her question seriously, so next time she has a more serious question, she'll come back and she'll ask that as well.
It would have been the same answer no matter what proportion of that.
For sure, right? But if you let her you let her think I'm thinking about this and I'm, excuse the pun, but I'm weighing up the the various ingredients over here to see if it's offset, then maybe next time.
Why such a? It's really admitting. It's not a halakha.
For sure, 100%. But what's the pshat? Very often people focus on little things that are of lesser importance, and they become very important to them. Especially people that maybe aren't so orthodox. They remember that their parents or their grandparents didn't use nuts. It becomes a very important thing.
Okay.
Your grandparents also kept Shabbat and kept Yom Tov and ate kosher. Yeah, fine, okay. But they didn't eat nuts either, right? So I need to worry about, I got to concentrate on one. This is my family custom. This is what we do, yeah.
Does the same reasoning apply to actual mitzvot themselves? Like some are more important, some are less important?
Oh, that's a real murky issue. The Mishnah in Pirkei Avot, in the Ethics of the Fathers, the Mishnah says that we should treat all mitzvot equally. Right? Easy mitzvot, difficult mitzvot. Why is that? Because we don't know, first of all, we don't know what the spiritual repercussions of that mitzvah is going to be in the spiritual realms, right? We don't have a clue when God comes to give. It's not that every mitzvah's got a certain amount of reward and it's given across the board to everybody, but depending on each person, depends on what they're getting, right? That's first off, right? So we've got no idea what the spiritual repercussion of a particular action is going to be. Aside from that, it is entirely conceivable that for one person, doing a mitzvah which is much more obviously important may be ultimately too difficult for them, and they'll end up not keeping anything. So to give you a ridiculous example, right? There's a halacha about how you're supposed to put your shoes on in the morning and tie up your right shoe first, and you put your right shoe on first, and you tie your left shoe first, right? It's halacha. Don't look at me like that. At some point we can talk about it, right? It's just I'm saying it's like a very basic halacha, right? In the league table of importance with halachas. So you've got somebody who comes and says, I don't know, should I put on my shoes properly or should I keep Shabbat? So the immediate reaction, of course, is going to be, well, keep Shabbos, of course. Are you kidding? But it's entirely conceivable that keeping Shabbos is going to be too much for them. And at some point, they're going to end up letting go of that, and they won't have anything, right? Whereas you tell them to do their shoes properly. So the Mishnah, another Mishnah in Pirkei Avot, which says, a mitzvah goreret mitzvah, that one mitzvah brings another mitzvah along with it. So I have no doubt whatsoever that if somebody starts keeping a mitzvah and they keep it properly, even if it's a relatively simple mitzvah, at some point that's going to draw other mitzvot along together with it. There's more chance of this person doing his shoes up properly and one day keeping Shabbat than maybe the person keeping Shabbat and then one day doing his shoes up properly.
Could it be there's nothing wrong with explaining that very same logic to someone? Like, keeping Shabbat would be great, but let's do your shoes.
Very good, right? Depending on the individual, it might be very good to instill in the person a certain desire, a certain what's the word? A certain aspiration for the future. But here, let's start off with something that's doable right now. Again, it does depend on the personality of the person, but for a lot of people, that would be a great thing to do. Tell them, of course, keeping Shabbat is like one of the most central mitzvot that we've got. It keeps the Jewish people united. We're all keeping Shabbat on the same day throughout the entire world. It's a very, very important dynamic inside of the Jewish world. Chada'am, one of the Jewish writers, once wrote that more than the Jews have kept Shabbat, Shabbat has kept the Jews. But if it's going to be too much right now, so keep something of seeming lesser importance, I guess, right? And hopefully at some point you'll get around to keeping Shabbat as well. Yes, good. Okay, I'm going to take this as stunned silence, right? That's the only alternative that there is, right? So for sure, you're not supposed to eat nuts, but again, that's not the focus of what this is all about. The real focus of Rosh Hashanah and the 10 days of repentance and Yom Kippur is to become better people than we were before, right? If you do that by munching your way through kilos of nuts, it's fine, it's great. Really, I'm telling you. Absolutely great. There's another custom, which is not to sleep on Rosh Hashanah day, right? There's a custom not to sleep on Rosh Hashanah day. The Arizal was of the opinion that from Chatzot, from midday onwards, it's okay. But listen carefully to what I'm going to tell you over here, because it comes with a little bit of a condition. The Arizal used to pray with what's called the nets. The nets is with the sun up. So you get to the beginning of the Shacharit Amida as the sun rises. Right? So the sun rises around, let's say 6:05. That means that in order to get on Rosh Hashanah morning, in order to be able to start davening with the sun at 6:05, you've probably got to start davening at around 5 o'clock. That means you've got to get up at, pretty early in order to get to shul, in order to be able to daven with the nets, with the sunrise. So when the Arizal says that it's okay to go to sleep from Chatzot onwards, the Arizal is talking about people that woke up in order to pray with the nets, right? They've had a nice long day. There's an Indian. Rosh Hashanah is Yom Adin. Yom Adin is a day of judgment. The judgment takes place in the morning, right? So as soon as the morning begins, then the judgment begins, and that's why after midday, it's no longer the time of judgment. It's not as intense as it was. So says the Arizal that it's okay to go to sleep from Chatzot onwards. Many people, regardless of the fact that the Arizal says what he says, many people have the custom not to sleep at all on Rosh Hashanah day, regardless of whether you get up for the nates or whether you go daven with a slightly later minyan. Most communities start Rosh Hashanah earlier than they start throughout the rest of the year, because there's a lot to say. Right? It's a lot of davening, there's a lot of prayer, there's a lot of things that need to be done, there's the shofar blowing, all kinds of things, right? And we've also got to be able to have the meal, and we've got to be able to get back and daven mincha as well, and then we've got to be able to daven ma'ariv and eat the meal on the second night of Rosh Hashanah, which means there's a lot to be done. So most shuls end up davening earlier anyway. But nevertheless, many people have the custom not to sleep at all.
Right, so you can go to sleep the first night until the morning of the next day.
Yeah, sure. Which is going to sleep at night is not a problem, because night is not considered to be a time of judgment. Okay. And what you'll probably find is that after the first day of Rosh Hashanah, you'll be wiped out, because it's a very intense, very long day, and you'll be quite happy to have a meal and then just to go to sleep and wake up the next day and next morning and go and do it all over again. It's a lot of fun. Some people have the custom to recite the whole of the book of Tehillim on Rosh Hashanah as well. It's the book of Psalms. Again, I'm just telling you, what the customs are. Whether you want to do them or not is dependent entirely upon you. Like I said, these things are customs, which means that it would be better for you to go to take a nap on Rosh Hashanah afternoon in order to be upbeat and excited about the second day of Rosh Hashanah than to keep yourself awake and be grouchy and miserable on the second day. For those of you who are going to be grouchy and miserable anyway, so I guess you shouldn't bother going to sleep.
Talk about the second night.
Talk about in general, right? People, lack of sleep tends to make people a little bit, a little bit tetchy. Mm-hmm. Okay, another custom that is normally done on the second day of Rosh Hashanah is something called tashlich. Now, I don't know if you're familiar with what tashlich is, but tashlich means going to a body of water, reciting a series of prayers. Some people have the custom to take some breadcrumbs with them and to throw them into the water, right? For the fish, right? To feed the fish, which is kind of cute. They're representative of your sins. You're throwing them into the river. The fish will eat them, and then you can eat them again on Friday night right? When you have your gefilte fish, you can have your sins back together with everyone else's, which is, whatever. It's just a symbol. There is a custom of the Vilna Gaon, of the Gra, not to go to a body of water, but rather just to recite the verses at home without going out. However, most people have the custom. It becomes like a communal thing. They'll go to a place where you can see water. Over here in Yerushalayim, it's not so posh. We don't have very many lakes over here, not very many rivers over here. What people tend to do is that they go to like the water tower. Most communities, most areas have a water tower, which is normally situated higher up than everywhere else, because the water obviously has to drain downwards, has to travel downwards, and they'll say tashlich in front of the water tower. Some people have the custom, they'll put out, in my street, there's one concerned citizen who actually puts out on his mirpeset kvisa, on the edge, on the ledge, he puts out an aquarium with fish inside of it, and people come and they recite tashlich underneath it. You don't have to have the body of water. If you have one, you have one. If you don't, you don't. The idea of tashlich is, again, it's coming from all different kinds of places, but it says that the Akedah, which is one of the central parts of the Torah reading of Rosh Hashanah, when God commanded Abraham to take Isaac and to offer him up as a sacrifice, so it says in the Midrash, it says that one of the things that Abraham did was that he had to wade through a river in order to get to where he was supposed to be going to, and it came up to his neck, and it was going to overwhelm him, and nevertheless the desire to fulfill the will of God overcame the power of the river, and the idea of tashlich being done by water is the same kind of an idea. Do you have to do it on the second day of Rosh Hashanah? No, you don't. You can have all the way through until the last intermediate day of Sukkot, which is called Hashanah Rabbah, to recite Tachnun. That's why some people actually prefer, people that live in Yerushalayim, for example, they prefer to wait until after Rosh Hashanah, and then they'll travel down to the sea, right, go to the coast, and they'll recite Tashlich over there, because you've got your body of water, you don't have them over here, so at least over there you've got the water and you've got the fish. Some people prefer to do it, during that time period, because there's more time and you've got more, you're more able to concentrate on what it is that you're doing. And that's one of the things that we recite when we eat fish on Rosh Hashanah. We say, Yirbu kedagim, we should be like, we should multiply like fish. And so the idea of sending our sins off to the fish, which represent a certain kind of a purity, in the hope that we will be pure like them. Good, that's tashlich. You know what, we'll end off with one last classic. This is like a classic Jewish problem. The Arizal says that we should cry during davening on Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur. It's good to cry. There is another opinion which says that you shouldn't cry. Are we Jewish or what, right? It's like a Jewish moment on Rosh Hashanah, right?
What's the third opinion?
The third opinion, you should cry only out of one eye.
I was just about to say that. Left or right?
Whichever one you don't cry out of, that's the one you should have cried out of. So you hear the conundrum over here, right? You're supposed to cry or you're not supposed to cry. So I once heard, in the name of Rabbi Yisrael Salanta, this is like a classic approach. Rabbi Yisrael Salanta was the founder of the Musa movement. Supposed to make us into better people, more sensitive people. Rabbi Yisrael Salanta said like this, that if a person feels like he wants to cry, then he shouldn't. And if a person feels like he doesn't want to cry, then he should. That's like a classic way of dealing with the problem, right? What is the origin of the machlokes, of the disagreement? Because how are we going to define Rosh Hashanah? Rosh Hashanah is Yom Adin. Yom Adin is a day of judgment. For sure, it's a day that we should be very concerned and cry as well. Many people cry when they're very concerned. We're talking about what's going to be for the year that's going to come ahead of us. Of course, we should be very, very, concerned and very intense in our desires, and that should bring tears. Says the Vilna Gaon, the Gra, on the other hand, Rosh Hashanah is also the day which commemorates the coronation of God. We turn God into our king, right? Avinu Malkeinu. God becomes our king. Everybody here, I hope you understand that Rosh Hashanah is, what day is Rosh Hashanah? Rosh Hashanah is the day in the creation of the world that Adam was created. It's not the beginning of the creation of the world. We're going to be in the year 5,776 from the creation of Adam, not from the creation of the world. The world was created 5.5 days earlier in non-quantifiable measurements. Right? There was nothing there to quantify. We don't know what that means, those 5.5 days. All we know is that we're counting the years from the moment that Adam was created. Everything else preceding that is something which is not quantifiable. That's a rather important dimension just inside of understanding about things like the age of the universe and what it means. Is that
the thing about the 5 days?
There were 5.5 days of creation which we have no way of being able to measure whatsoever. Non-quantifiable. Right? So for example, it says on the first day that God created, God created light and darkness, and yet there's no sun and there's no moon. The sun and the moon were created on the fourth day. What does that mean? I don't have a clue. Right? We don't understand. It's a spiritual dimension which is non-quantifiable. The only time that we're able to begin quantifying something is when Adam is created. Adam is created halfway through the 6th day of creation. Which means for 5.5 days preceding the creation of Adam, we've got no way of counting anything. From Adam onwards, that's where the counting begins. So when we move into Rosh Hashanah, we're going to move into the year of 5776 from the creation of Adam, not from any other moment before that. Which means that with regards to things like the age of the universe, the world has been around for 5,776 years plus 5.5 unquantifiable units. Right? Whatever they are, whatever that means. Says the Vilna Gaon, because we are coronating God and we're turning him into our king, that is not a time for tears. We're not supposed to cry on Rosh Hashanah. It's a time of great joy. Like, what could be more joyful than knowing that God is your king?
So what's the stronger opinion?
There is no stronger opinion. Really, the way that it works out over here is that whatever you do, it's going to be okay. Which means that if you cry, then for sure you're tapping into the concept of Yom Adin, unless you're crying because the prayers are so long and you don't know what's going on. And
like joyful that
tears of joy, again, but it's interesting, tears of joy, for sure, according to the Vilna Gaon, tears of joy would be good as well, but they won't fulfill the idea of crying because of your fear of Yom Adin.
Yeah, but you're getting to Rosh Hashanah, you're praying that, you're happy that, hey, I hope God gives me another year.
Yeah, okay, good.
I'll be happy if I'm going in front of a judge and he's like, oh yeah, I'm going to wipe your slate clean.
Yep.
I'll be happy.
But until that moment happens, until the judge says that.
Yeah, you don't know, but
you don't know.
Coronation,
happy, though.
Yeah. Right, the idea of coronation is the idea of sublimation, right? That God is the king. We are giving up our absolute freedom in order to allow ourselves to be ruled by God. And that's a tremendous day of joy. Okay, I think we're supposed to end over here.